Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate and a special interview with the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Raghuram Rajan. Dr. Rajan, let's start with the state of the economy as it is today before I ask you questions about how the bank sees its future. And let's begin with economic growth. For the first 6 months of this financial year, it's been just 4.6%. And on Tuesday, you readily accepted that it will be under 5% for the year as a whole. How worried are you by the declining growth the country is experiencing?
Well, I think it's stabilizing at a low level. I don't think we see significant further declines at this point. Question is, when is it going to come up? The hope is that with the rest of the world starting to pick up more strongly, with our agriculture doing well, and with our, our projects, the big projects starting to slowly come back to life, that we will get stronger growth.
You say it's stabilizing at a low level, but where do you think it's going to actually stop? Because independent institutions like Fitch, CRISIL, the World Bank, the IMF, put it variously for the year as a whole between 4.2 and 4.8.
Yeah, I think the precise number is not
But
germane.
above 4.5 or around 4.5?
No, as we said in the report, slightly below 5. I think for the year as a whole, we will be between 4.5 and 5. But where precisely depends on so many imponderables that...
Within that overall figure, how worried are you about industry? And I suppose I mean manufacturing in particular, because the index of industrial production for the last 8 months has been in negative territory, and in November it sharply fell by 2.1%. Does industry face a particular problem?
No, industry is weak. Industry is weak. Manufacturing especially is very weak. Of course, weakness eventually creates the source for rebirth.
But you may have to fall a lot before that happens.
Well, I think we've fallen quite a bit. And so I think the conditions are getting into place for stronger growth.
Is that a hope, or is that based on some factual analysis?
No, I think when you look at... So we've had hope for quite some time that we're stabilizing, we're starting to pick up. The magic impetus which creates the kind of activity, I start doing stuff, I start investing, which then creates demand for your stuff, which makes you invest. What's missing really is investment. Investment is based, as you know, on animal spirits. When those animal spirits start picking up, I'm hopeful the revival of the large projects, which we see some
Have you knocked that investment and the revival of animal spirits by hiking interest rates at a time when most people thought you might just maintain the status quo? Industry, as you must be aware, is very depressed by your hike.
Yeah, good question. I mean, really, if you talk to the bankers, the hike is sort of infra-marginal. To put it differently, in layman's language, they already see that depositors are demanding a high rate of interest, much higher than our policy rate.
Because inflation is high.
Because inflation is high. So to that...
So in other words, your bringing the interest rate down wouldn't have brought the rate down that they borrow up.
For them. The real...
But have you sent the wrong message nonetheless?
No. I think what we've done is we've sent a signal that we want to bring inflation down, because the key problem for them is not the interest rate, it is inflation. Unless we bring inflation down, deposit rates aren't going to come down, bankers aren't going to reduce the cost of funding.
Let's then come to inflation. The wholesale inflation index has admittedly come down to 6.16%, but the consumer or the retail price index is still at a fairly worryingly high 9.87. And yet on Tuesday, you seem to suggest that there may not be an immediate need for further interest rate hikes. So are you confident that inflation is actually on a glide downwards? Or
no.
Once again, is this hope?
No, first you asked me why I raised rates, and now you're asking me why, I haven't raised rates enough.
Because I'm picking up on your optimism, and I'm actually questioning the optimism.
Yeah, so what we've done is taken into account that there is some disinflation in the system, that what was 9.87 is going to come down further next month, probably a little further into March. Now, we're setting rates at a level that we think is consistent with that disinflation for us to get some bite and for the inflation system to come down to about 8% at the end of the year.
But was your heart in that sentence which suggested to people that in fact another interest rate hike may not be necessary, it may not be foreseeable? Because a lot of people took heart from that despite the hike that you did.
No. So our statement was we've done what we think is necessary at this point.
And hopefully no more.
And hopefully no more. But...
So it is a hope.
It's a hope, absolutely, because I'm not clairvoyant. There may be reasons to do more, there may be reasons to do less.
But at the moment, you're hoping you won't have to do more.
At the moment, I think I've done enough.
All right, let's come to the fiscal deficit. Given that this year growth is going to be way below the budget target of 6.4%, given that fuel and fertilizer subsidies are likely to rise perhaps substantially above the budget target of 65,000 crore because of the depreciated rupee, and given that the 40,000 crore disinvestment target will be missed by a long margin, do you think Mr. Chidambaram can actually meet his 4.8% fiscal deficit target?
I think they'll get close. I mean, from what I hear, there's been a substantial amount of spending cuts that have been put into place, a substantial amount. And so I think, you know, whether it's 4.8 on the nose or not, it'll be very close enough not to matter that much.
Close enough not to matter, but the problem is if he misses 4.8, having said repeatedly, more often than anything else that he's ever said, that he's going to meet that red line, missing it even by 0.01 will actually worry people, won't it?
No,
because he's put so much stress on it.
Yeah, but I think the government will make every effort to meet it. So I think there is a high probability that it will. But what I do want to emphasize is even if it doesn't, there has been a substantial amount of fiscal contraction. So much of the heavy lifting will have been done.
You say even if it doesn't, it won't really worry people, but I'll tell you...
It should not.
I'll tell you one reason why people are getting worried is because, in fact, the cabinet is at Rahul Gandhi's behest raising the cap on subsidized LPG cylinders from 9 to 12. That will add several thousand crore more to his subsidy bill. And if he's anyway missing it, this will make sure he misses it substantially.
Well, I was talking about everything included, but, you know...
This was included?
What one should be careful about is expanding the misdirected subsidies in the system. I think we have to be very careful because, we need to spend on very important things we're not spending on.
Is an increase in LPG cylinders expanding the misdirected subsidy?
I believe that there is a certain amount of the population that perhaps can benefit from subsidized LPG cylinders. But beyond a certain point, you're reaching people who can well afford to pay for it. Now, whose pocket is that coming from? It's coming from the very pockets of the people who are getting subsidized.
So just to underline, when you go from 9 to 12, you're reaching people who can actually afford to pay, who don't need subsidy, and this therefore would be a misdirected subsidy.
You're going from 87 to 97 according to, I think, the government's figures, 87% of the population to 97% of the population. If you're subsidizing 97% of the population, you're basically subsidizing people who are paying for it themselves.
I think the message from the governor is crystal clear. This would be a misdirected subsidy. On the other hand, the Hindu on its front page on Monday claimed that Mr. Chidambaram will be able to reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.65%, which is actually below his 4.8% target, with a combination of very severe expenditure cuts, probably mimicking what he did last year, alongside pushing to next year a far greater proportion of subsidies than he's done in previous years. To the extent he depends on the latter, would he not, in a sense, be pulling the wool over people's eyes? He's just passing the buck to someone else.
No, my sense is there is a certain amount of carryover of this year's subsidies into next year's accounting, which compensates for what was carried over from the previous year.
So if he does more than in the previous years...
I guess it depends on how much is done, etc.
How much more?
Yeah. So, but again, let me emphasize that there is a fair amount of fiscal correction that is already embedded into the government's plan.
But there's something very interesting when you say, I guess it depends on how much more than in previous years, because what you're really saying in layman's language, a little cheating in quotations is okay, but if you overdo it, people will catch you out.
You said it.
Your smile underlines it for me. A few hours ago, the American Federal Reserve has increased the quantity of tapering that it does by $10 billion. Does this have adverse implications for the Indian economy that concern or perhaps even worry you?
I think that when combined with the fragility of some other emerging markets like Turkey, there is a sense of risk-off which pervades the financial markets. And during that initial period, they tend to be undiscriminating. perhaps even emerging markets which are more liquid, which are doing better, become the place where they sell, because they want to get out of emerging markets. I can't sell it in place A, so I sell in place B, which is more liquid. So we all get hit, and we've been hit in the last few days by that. Do I worry that this continues beyond a certain point? I don't think we're in the same circumstances that we were in July, August.
So our situation is not as vulnerable or as fragile as it was in July, August. That's the first point you're saying.
Primarily because of significant actions by the government and the Reserve Bank on bringing the fiscal deficit, the current account deficit down.
If he misses the fiscal deficit target, which we now are accepting that he may do, and if he misses it by a number that worries people rather than an amount that people are sanguine about, would that then, with increased tapering, create a problem?
Well, first let me say I don't expect him to miss the target. Second, as I said, people will look at the totality of the fiscal plan, and not just this year, but also going forward. And so to that extent, I think a little bit this way, that way will not be a huge problem, provided there are credible plans over the medium term. Remember, what people worry about is how much debt you're going to build up as a country. And I think our debt profile is actually quite reasonable.
But Dr. Rajan, future credible plans are only reassuring if you actually are meeting them in this year. If in the first year or the second year you look as if you're failing, no matter how credible the future looks, people will say, well, will the future also then be unmet or failed?
That's precisely why I said they will look at the totality. If you're missing by a little bit, but a lot of what you've done is fiscal consolidation, you get you get credit. While if what you're doing is you're missing by a lot, and whatever you've done is also, in your words, pushing stuff into the future, then I think you get less credit.
Dr. Rajan, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to widen the discussion and ask you about the future outlook for the Indian economy over the long-term horizon. All of that in a moment's time. Don't go away. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and a special interview with the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Raghuram Rajan. Dr. Rajan, let's look at a slightly wider picture. In a recent interview to Nikkei's Asian Review, you said India could grow at 10% for 20 years, provided, and I think I'm quoting you correctly, the right steps are taken. What are the right steps that need to be taken? We all want to grow at 10% for 20 years, but what are the right steps?
Infrastructure, human capital, business regulation, finance. 4 steps.
Infrastructure has been acknowledged as a right step for a long time, but no one seems to do very much about it.
No, we have huge plans in place. Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, Eastern Freight Corridor, Mumbai-Bangalore. I mean, these were words. These are now, I believe, talking to people who are financing this, being translated into action on the ground. Actually, investment coming in.
At a fast enough speed to satisfy you?
There's actually competition. Now, satisfy me, I don't know enough. I want to see this progress. But I think that we are starting, putting the plants on the ground.
Number 2 was human capital.
Number 2 was human capital. There, we're not doing as good a job as we could on quality of education. We've done a reasonable job on quantity. We've got everybody, at least in the first few years, into school. We've got to keep them there by improving the quality of education.
This is, at best, a medium term, probably in India, a long-term target to achieve. We don't seem to do it quickly enough, do we?
No, we can. I mean, if we take really a strong push here, we start testing more kids in school. That's one of the things that we've sort of thrown out of the window. We need to do that.
The telling thing was the stress you put on the word can. We can, as if chances are we probably won't.
I don't think we should be so pessimistic. I think if you look at we talk a lot,
okay,
but we start delivering.
Number 3 was finance.
No, number 3 was business regulation.
Okay, finance was 4th.
Finance was 4th. Business regulation, we got to make it much simpler. We got to make it much simpler for the entrepreneur to start up. Yes, and we need to protect the environment. Yes, we need to protect the rights of underprivileged to their land, etc. But we can speed up the process by which we respect those rights, by which we respect the environment.
Does business regulation also include making labor laws easier for people?
I think there's a win-win situation there, that we have a vast amount of labor which is unprotected, at the same time as we have these labor laws which make it very hard for us to give them more protection.
So you're saying change the labor laws and make them more flexible?
We can make them more flexible even while giving more protection to the vast number of contractual
Two quick questions there before I come to finance. Do you think politicians are in a mood to listen to this advice, make labor laws more flexible? And having listened to it, do you think they're going to be capable of acting? Because it requires deft action.
I think it requires political will and then communication, because I really do think there's win-win for all sides here. But it requires a leader to see that and then to start talking about it. Labor thus far has been taboo in some sense, but we need people to start talking about it, because ultimately the jobs for that demographic dividend that we hope to reap, we won't get those jobs until we make these big changes in business regulations.
You're putting a lot of faith in politicians when you say we need a leader to recognize that and then to act on it. So far, when it comes to making labor laws more flexible, it's a taboo subject which leaders shy away from. You're hoping the opposite will happen.
Absolutely.
Fourth, finance.
Finance. Look, finance is actually the easiest, in my view, of the four. We need to have a more competitive, inclusive, deeper financial system.
This is where you as a governor can play a major role.
Absolutely. This is what I should have been talking about throughout the entire interview. But,
what are your plans there? Do you have 2 or 3 top plans?
Of course. Banking system, we're going to make more competitive. We're going to bring in a whole new set of structures. We, of course, have to have these new banks that we're going to license. So that's one. Monetary policy, we're going to talk about a little bit. We're going to create a framework which is clear, which is on par with the rest of the world. We need to be much more clear about it. Financial inclusion. We need to improve financial inclusion. Reach everybody. And reach them not just with credit, but payments. Let them have a safe account that they can use.
How much time do you give yourself before you deliver on number 4? Because that's entirely in your purview as governor.
Yeah, well, I have a 3-year mandate. That's my contract.
It will be done before the 3 years are over?
Well, we'll push as hard as we can to do what we can over the next 3 years.
2 other quick questions. I want to remind you of something you wrote in one of your articles not so long ago. You said, what should central banks do when politicians seem incapable of acting? What's your answer as a central banker in today's context?
So what I said in that article is, they shouldn't try and compensate for the politician, because that could create tremendous problems for the system down the line, which is what the industrial countries are doing, keeping interest rates really, really low because they don't see political action, which is building up also the vulnerabilities, one of which we're experiencing because we've seen a lot of easy money come into the emerging markets now leaving. But I think in India, we can contribute to the growth agenda as a central bank because there's so much development to be done. And one of the things we're focusing on over the next few months is, can we push the development agenda from our side, because much of it doesn't require legislative action.
So once again, this is a central focus for Raghuram Rajan as governor.
Absolutely.
My last question. All the polls suggest that at the national elections, just 3 months down the road, we're going to see a BJP-led government with Narendra Modi as Prime Minister. How do you, as governor of the Reserve Bank, view the prospect of working with Mr. Modi?
Well, whatever government comes into power, the central bank and I would be very happy to work with that government. I think, whatever government comes in, there is a very clear agenda that is necessary for that, for us going forward, which is bring back growth.
Let me ask you a simple key question. You were appointed by Dr. Manmohan Singh and a Congress administration. Would you feel a moral need to offer your resignation to a new government so that if they want, they can have a new man as governor? Or do you think that would be politicizing the office for you to even think of it?
I haven't thought about what I would do, so I don't have an easy answer to the question. I think this office, as the office of any technical administrator, is something that goes on when there's a change in government.
It's above party politics.
As far as I understand, which is why I have no comment on the next government. Whatever government comes in, the Reserve Bank and I will work with it.
Governor Rajan, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.